I'm a Night Wolf. I'm Cherokee, Shoshone, and Taino. It's a great pleasure and honor to be sitting on the front porch of Frederick Douglass, talking to you today. I would like to take you on a journey. We're going to go back in time. 50,000 years ago. Right here in the Western Hemisphere is when blacks and Indians had their first contact. The first people that came here from Africa were a group of sailors, and they were sea merchants. They were the Phoenicians. But as white history tells you, white people think or try to give you this image, this false image. They said that they were white sailors. They were not. They were black ocean-going sea merchants that had created opportunities of trade and commerce on the high seas 50,000 years ago. The second people from Africa that came here were the people of Mali. The history between the African and the Indian is a beautiful history, one of struggle, one of survival. The next major group of African people to come here were my black brothers and sisters that they brought here on slave ships. All parts of the Western Hemisphere, including the Caribbean islands and Cuba, was where they dropped a lot of African people.
Okay.
The people of Mali came. Not all of them went back to Africa. This was before the institution of chattel slavery in America by the European invaders. The stories went back across the water with a lot of these people. And when we talk about the Phoenicians that were international sea merchants, a lot of the tribal people from different tribes on the East Coast traveled with them and got involved in international slavery. I'm not international slavery, but international trade. One of the major events in the history of the Western Hemisphere was when the slave trade began. We would watch them from the forest drop their anchors off the coast of the Carolinas and the Virginias and open up the hulls of their ships. And we would see these strong black men in chains and shackles coming out of these ships. We knew who they were because they had been here before. They had actually become part of our communities and intermarried with us. And when they got off of these ships, they were being beaten and sold on auction blocks. We knew what it felt like to be victims of this kind of evil and mean treatment to the human beings that were already here. Whenever they ran away from the slavers and the auction blocks and the plantations, the very first instinct of the African was to run back to the water, to the ocean, and try to commandeer a vessel to get back home. In their voyage from Africa to the Americas, they were crippled. They were crippled because they were kept in the bottom of these ships, in the hulls of the ships. And at night, they were not allowed to see the stars or much of the sun during the day. Because to cross large bodies of water, you use the stars and the sun and the moon to navigate. So even if they were successful in getting a ship to go back, they didn't know how to go back home. So when they ran down to the waters and tried to find a ship, they couldn't. They turned and ran into the forest. And when they ran into the forest, they ran into us. And we took them in. They became part of our communities. They became part of everything that we did. Another sad part is that they were never allowed to go back home. They were never allowed to raise families. So they in turn became family with us and we with them. In the South, the southern part of the United States, when black folks ran away from the slavers and the plantations, before they left, they would be singing songs while they worked in the fields. It's a new day coming. Oh, I hear the whistle blowing. Many of those phrases were used as telling when and where they were going to gather to talk about this issue of being enslaved. So when they headed north, and one of the strongest women of color that ever lived in the Western Hemisphere, Harriet Tubman, she created the Underground Railroad, but she had help. Her help came from native peoples, different tribes all along the East Coast. And whenever they stopped to rest, every place they stopped was manned, with the exception of a few, by native brothers and sisters. We fed them. We gave them a safe place to stay at night. If they were sick, our native medicines were used to heal them. And as they traveled north, when they got to New York, there was a nation of native people there, the Onondagas, the Oneidas, the Mohawks, the 7 nations or the Iroquois Confederacy. But one outstanding chief of the Onondaga Oneida people was Chief Shenandoah. Chief Shenandoah would wait until there were a sizable amount of native people there to receive this sizable amount of escapees, black people. And he would assemble them and have his guides and warriors to take them into Canada for absolute freedom. So you see, without the loving relationships between blacks and Indians, black people would not have survived in this country. And black people were the only people that we opened up our homelands to and received wholeheartedly. We knew their plight. We knew their struggle.
You know, it's one of the things that you had spoke with the minister about was the count when it came to slavery, when you were talking about the percentage of blacks in slavery and Native Americans during that time. Could you explain that, what you were talking about with the minister?
You know what, brother? If you were to walk into any mosque in America and you just laid your hands on the first person or the third person or the fifth person that you see, you realize that you're laying your hands on a Native American?
I believe.
There were only 8% of the slaves that came to America. So how is it that there are so many more people that they claim are black or African American? I think they got the numbers wrong, because a lot of Native Americans are the ones that they're counting as black folks too. The count. This European invader was not a sensible individual. He was evil. Greed and arrogance was his forte. Not only did they enslave Africans, but enslaved a lot of our people. Through fighting with them, they would capture our people. Even before there was black chattel slavery in America, the Native American was the first slave in the Americas. But the biggest problem they had with making us slaves was we were in our homelands, and we knew how to run away and where to go. They were never, ever successful in capturing Native people and making them slaves. A lot of black people had a passion towards Native people. Why? Because we helped them. We had a passion towards them. And out of this struggle for survival came a new people, the Black American Indian. Out of necessity. The skills that they brought from Africa, along with the skills that we had here in the Western Hemisphere, locked into a union for survival. Too many people walk around every day claiming that the first people here were black people. It was not. You have to go way back in history when the Creator made this world. There's only one piece of land surrounded by water. And because of the natural movement of the land and the separation of the tectonic shelves, land began to float, separate. Now it is true that everything began in Africa. When you look at my skin color and you look at one of my dark African brothers and sisters' skin color, and you look at the Asian people's skin color and the European skin color, there are four separate colors. How did that happen? Night Wolf? And who was the first people that the Creator made? Was it white people? No. There's only one people. The color of your skin, the texture of your hair, and the color of your eyes are a direct result of geographical locations and climatic conditions. When that land that floated north from Africa, and the people became so light until they gave it a color white, but I've never seen a white person in my life, not a real white person. And their eyes became blue. Why? One of the reasons is that there was not such a great need for melanin. So if you're not as close to the sun as the people in Africa were, over a period of time, a few generations, you begin to get lighter and lighter and lighter. The land that floated west of Africa because of the tropical conditions and geographical locations, we were not really black anymore, or African black, as some like to call it. You can see that in our skin, but you also see that reddish red color in our skin. The people of Asia, the ones that you call Chinese, Korean, and Vietnamese, or whatever, they were midway that separation of land from Africa and Europe. And their skin became a very light color, almost yellow. Those four colors, the red, the black, the white, and the yellow, are actually the four colors of the four directions. And they're also the four colors of humanity. If one of those colors turn up missing, everything else is in jeopardy. So this is why I embrace my brothers and sisters from the continent of Africa. This is why I embrace my brothers and sisters from the Asian countries. And of course I embrace my people. And you have to also embrace white people. It's not about the color of your skin or the color of your eyes or the texture of your hair or the clothes you wear, who you worship and call God, or what you eat. What it's really all about is how you treat my heart. There's so much to say about that. It's not the rich man that we're at odds with. It's the wealthy man. Their whole everything is controlling the wealth. And this is why the world finds itself the way it is today, confused, broken, and hurt. No man is above any other man. We're all the same. My very, very good friend, Minister Louis Farrakhan, I love that brother, is one of the few people that I've met in my life that preaches the truth about all of us. God forbid him anything happening to him, because we're all going to be in trouble. Just recently we had these crazy hurricanes, and whether any of you know it or not, these hurricanes originated off of the west coast of Africa, along the routes of the slave ships. And this is God warning us that if we don't get it right, he's going to step in and make it right. And I have to agree with my brother, because when he says we don't need guns, no, we don't need guns. God would use the natural elements to level the playing field, even if it means destroying some people in the process. And some of those people, the way they think, the way they act, the way they treat people, maybe that's their destiny to be destroyed. And I'll say the same thing that he says. Watch the weather. That's all you have to do is watch the weather. Texas, underwater. West coast of Florida, underwater. Louisiana, underwater. Puerto Rico, the Virgin Islands, underwater. You've never heard of anything like that before. 100 years ago. Man has done so much devilment and evil to the planet that God gave us, Grandmother Earth. She's rebelling. She's had enough. drilling into her, taking her blood out, oil, only for money. You know, if you kick a dog enough, a dog will bite you. We're at a crisis now. Humanity is at a crisis. The earth is warming as a result of what man has done. Use everything that he can to make money.
You know, one of the stories you talked about was of the Native American being over 10 million at one point, now to less than 1 million.
When the European invader came here in the late 1490s, there were 112 million of us in this Republic of the United States. It's not a country, it's a republic. And in less than 500 years, through genocidal practices, through the introduction of diseases that we had no immunity to, and other evil things that he brought with him, arrogance and greed, our numbers went from 112 million to less than 1 million by 1930. How do you kill off 111 million great people, loving people, people that are willing to share whatever they have, regardless of how small it is or how much they got? How do you do that?
That's a genocide you don't hear in the history books.
Absolutely. And another form of genocide that they practiced on us was paper genocide. There was a Dr. Arthur Plecker in Virginia, a cold-blooded racist, through taking a baby, an Indian baby, and instead of putting Indian or tribal name on that birth certificate, he would put mulatto or other. So many people walking around, even today as we speak, 2017, don't know who they are. Because at birth, their identity was destroyed through Dr. Arthur Plecker, the father of eugenics, who became the director of vital statistics during this time for the state of Virginia.
Now, another thing that they teach in the history book was the whole Thanksgiving, the meeting. But you know, we talked about that, and I wanted people to know the truth about that. It was actually, if you want to talk about how Thanksgiving came about.
I do want to talk about it. First of all, you got to remember, my dear brother, that's history, his story. It's not our story. When they proclaimed Thanksgiving, it was in Mystic, Connecticut. A tribe of Indian people, the Pequots, that were thriving and surviving. But shortly after, we taught these white people how to farm and how to take care of the land and raise food. They got beside themselves. A few years after they started prospering, they decided that they were going to take their women and their children out to a big field and have a cookout celebration. No Indians brought deer. There was never a Thanksgiving dinner with them, according to what they say. Not true. The celebration of Thanksgiving was the men walked off from their families and went further north into Mystic, Connecticut, and he murdered these Pequot Indian children, elders, women, and men. Got them in the enclosure of their habitat. They had built forts, per se, but that was only for the protection of their people. And they trapped them in where they couldn't get out, and they set it on fire, and they burned them to death. Then they came back. They were so thankful that they had killed these Indians, but that was the first Thanksgiving, not what you read about in their books.
It wasn't until when President Lincoln decided, instead of having it every other day when they were going to different tribes, killing them, that he decided to make it once a year, a day of Thanksgiving once a year.
True. But let me tell you about President Lincoln. Because Indians, the Lakota, and Nakota Indians wouldn't give up. These are the people from Minnesota, North Dakota, South Dakota, up in that area, would not give up. They were fighting, and they captured in excess of 200 of them. And they wanted to hang them all. But Lincoln intervened because of politics, should I say politics. And he said, no, I don't want you to hang them all. Pick 38 of them. And that's how they came up with the Mankato 38. That was the largest mass hanging ever in this country, this republic.
Now, one of the things that happened was Russell Means went before Congress to talk about the conditions that were going on with the Native Americans.
Russell Means was a great man. He was Oglala Lakota from Pine Ridge Reservation in South Dakota. I've been there many times. Russell Means, along with Dennis Banks, Clyde Bellicourt, Vernon Bellicourt, John Trudell, and the list goes on, brought about a new organization called AIM, the American Indian Movement. And this was an Indian movement that started back in the 70s that said, you know, we're not taking this anymore from these white people. They're going to give us ours back. They came to Washington and D.C. in the late 70s and did an armed takeover of the Department of Interior Bureau of Indian Affairs. Because Indian people are just fed up with the same old poison that they have been feeding us. Some of the things on that reservation in Pine Ridge, you just wouldn't believe it.
It's actually the poorest county in America. If you want to speak of ghettos, that is the poorest county in America.
Drug infested, alcohol infested, diseased,
lack of jobs,
80% unemployment, and the highest suicide rate in America is Native American young people from the ages of 18 down to 5.
Yasanada Lone Wolf talked about that.
Oh yeah. There's a lot that the world can learn from the American Indian experience. If it wasn't for the American Indian movement, a lot of the things that we've accomplished we wouldn't have. Casinos, like that's an answer, that's not an answer to anything. But self-determination came out of the American Indian movement. Russell Means was one of the smartest men I ever had an opportunity to like and dislike. We've had our differences. But he had the nerve to come here and address the United States Congress. And a lot of these congressional members that are still there,
Senator McCain.
John McCain, he got all over John McCain. All John McCain could do was just look at him because he knew Russell was telling the truth. When they started to try to get rid of our forms of government and replace them with these so-called educated Indians, that was the beginning of great misery to the American Indian. Why? Because these governments that they created and put in place were designed not for the Indian to secede, but for the Indian to continue to do like this with his hand out. And Russell Means, bless him, he's in spirit world, died a few years ago, was one that would not give up the occupation of Wounded Knee. Every Native leader, every black leader, every Asian leader or Hispanic leader that dared to step up against their powers mysteriously died. One of my greatest heroes is Leonard Peltier. He was the scapegoat for the government. Leonard Peltier, they claim, killed the 2 FBI agents. Leonard Peltier was nowhere near where that happened or when it happened at the time it happened. Even William Kunstler, a great lawyer, asked the then director of the FBI, was Mr. Peltier, do you think he killed the agents? And his reply, we don't know who killed the agents, but an Indian must pay. And Mr. Peltier is that Indian. So in other words, they didn't care who the Indian was, they had to blame it on an Indian. The Indians didn't start that fight on Wounded Knee. If they just left the Indians alone, then they wouldn't have had the outcome that they had.
What was the FBI doing there during that time?
There was a leader, a chief then, of the Oglala Lakotas, who was no more than the white man's Indian, who didn't like Indians standing up and speaking for themselves and trying to uplift themselves, because he was a crook. As long as he remained in power, he got paid. He had his goons that was on his payroll as well. And I believe that that chief was the one to call the FBI in only because, as people today are resisting Donald Trump, dared to resist Nixon and everyone else in this American system that were in control at the time. So they called in the FBI, they called in the National Guard and countless others to smoke these Indians out and break it up and get them out of there. But they had no idea of the determination that my people had to not to be oppressed anymore, to not to be neglected anymore, to not to be taken advantage of anymore, to not allow white men to come on reservations and rape the women and kill them. They just had enough of that. Ain't gonna have it no more. So of course, as they usually do, they conjured up some mess and blamed it on the Indians. Leonard Peltier at the time was one of the most outspoken. But there were 2 other Indians that were blamed for it too. They decided to hold a separate trial for them and they let them go. but because of Leonard Peltier's passion for the people that he could not let go of, they decided to make an example out of this damn Indian. And that's why Leonard Peltier is in prison now. He's been in prison longer than any other political prisoner that America has ever had in prison. They refuse to let him go. The man is sick, the man is old, the man's got diabetes, and God knows what else. He's got heart conditions. But they refuse to let him go because that would be a mockery unto their beliefs, to allow an Indian to walk free that has the nerve and the backbone to stand up against their evilness.
Yeah, I was definitely surprised the last administration didn't let him, didn't pardon him when they did with Mr. Lopez from Puerto Rico.
Mm-hmm.
So I thought he would get that nod, but it didn't happen.
It didn't happen.
But like you said, I guess he's going to make an example of him. Even you have Amnesty International, everyone's saying this is wrong, or what they're doing, and yet.
But yet and still, this fool in the White House, Trump, can go and pardon this Joe Arpaio, the sheriff in Arizona, that was on charges of felonies, even before the trial. See, one thing you realize, that wealthy white men and those that they consider to be part of their elite group will always have privilege over anybody else. Now, let me become the police chief of New York City, and I start going and questioning all of these European folks that have overstayed their visas, and start putting them out or putting them up for deportation. Watch what'll happen to me. I won't get pardoned. I'd get dead. They would kill me. Only because I know the truth. I've seen so much go down in this country that it just, so much that I consider to be unforgivable sins. But they continue to forgive and forgive their own over and over again. Their white friends, their colored friends, their Negroes, you know, that will do anything that they say do. You know, they still looking for a master. You don't need a master. You are your own master. God made you in His image, not in their image, not to be submissive to them, their wills and their whims. You know, it's... I'm 70 years old now, and I have plans to live to be at least 100, like my grandfathers did. It's hard, but just like my ancestors that survived, I will survive.
Just speaking on that, as you said, as being an elder, you've seen a lot of leaders in different communities are up in age right now. Do you see that next generation of leaders stepping up or even coming out right now?
Well, we just buried
Baba Dick Gregory,
my good friend and brother, Baba Dick Gregory. Shortly before that, I buried another one of my native brothers who was an elder, David Arnett. Shortly before that, I buried other friends and relatives. If you stick to what God gave you in your heart, and if you listen to the wisdom of the elders, you know, this is a little funny, right? But Richard Pryor was one of my favorite comedians of all times. When he says, you know, yeah, I'm old. I didn't get to be old being no fool. you know. And young black men, young black women, young Native men, young Native women, young Asian men and women. Pay attention to your elders. You know, all white people are not bad, just like all black people and all Indians and everybody else is not good. There's one thing I can say to the credit of Dr. Martin Luther King when he made this profound statement. Don't judge me by the color of my skin, but by the content of my character. And a great philosopher, Schopenhauer, said, no lie can live forever. And in America today, the lie is being outed. The truth about what these people have done since they've been here is coming to fruition. There is a revelation coming to you. It's not what Night will say, but it's what God commands. And woe unto you the day when you must answer to Almighty God, the Creator. Is there an answer to this? You know, if these white, wealthy people turn away from their evil ways, I don't know. Maybe it's too late. I don't see it happening. But don't look upon somebody and base your feelings and your thoughts about them on the color of their skin. My grandfather used to always say, Paul, your brother don't always have to look like you to be your brother. Think about that. There's a lot in that statement. One of the greatest white men that ever lived was John Brown. And he died protecting people that were enslaved. He died fighting for their freedom. And he just happened to be white. So what you got to say about that?
Facts.
Think about it.
I wanted to go back because for people who might not know about the longest walk from Alcatraz to here.
Alcatraz was actually the beginning of the American Indian movement. When the federal government gave up that correction facility on Alcatraz, some of the Indians out west decided to reclaim that property. It was John Trudell and quite a few other Native people that went there and took over that island. Of course, they ended up punishing him and anyone and everyone else that was involved in that. But that was their right to take over land that belonged to us originally. And then they began to walk from California to Washington, D.C. for justice for the American Indian. Dennis Banks, Russell Means, Clyde Bella Courtney, a host of others led the march out here. And they've been doing it for years just to get the U.S. Congress of these United Snakes to at least listen to their history and what they've done to us, and the lies they told, and the treaties that they broke. Every treaty made between the U.S. government and the American Indian has been abrogated or broken. So it was also called the Trail of Broken Treaties. See, this evil, wealthy white man thinks that he could just do anything to people anywhere in the world and not have to pay. But beware, God's retribution upon you, your ancestors, is a big price to pay. When you mention Black Lives Matter, oh, that's just some of them colored folks over there raising hell. When we fight for our rights, the indigenous rights of the people of the Americas, it's them damn Indians again. But just as soon as one of theirs opened fire and killed 58 of them at a country western concert, then all of a sudden the outpour, this is wrong. And you know the one thing that's really puzzling them about that? See, I feel sorry for anybody that's gunned down. I don't give a color. I don't care what color you are. It's wrong. But then for this president that has done nothing in 2 weeks for the people of Puerto Rico, the Caribbean islands, to just jump up the next morning and say, oh, this is wrong, God will bless you. That's a bunch of crap, and you know it. This country is all about white supremacy and white privilege. If you ain't white, you ain't right. But I got news for them. Without the black man, the red man, the yellow man, this country wouldn't stand. Because when they came here, they were too damn lazy to do their own work. And what did? They enslaved the Indian people. After that wouldn't work, they enslaved the African. So how much thanks do you give to us, the people of color, for everything we did for you? Again, no lie can live forever. This is a warning to white America. No lie can live forever. And the white folks I'm talking about, you know who I'm talking about. I'm not talking about the everyday white people. Those that get out there and struggle every day to go to work like so many of us do. I'm not talking about them. I'm talking about the wealthy white elitists. Woe unto you. Because you're not going to be able to stand it when God brings down the fire and brimstone on your butts. You're not going to be able to stand it.
Lastly, I just wanted to talk about just going. I'm actually going back a little bit, going back to the 60s. How the Native Americans and blacks during that time. What was the culture like during that time when you had the movements around, like such as the Black Panther movement during that time?
Well, you know, a lot of people were afraid of all colors to come out in support of the Panthers, the Deacons of Justice, and all of these so-called named by the white man radical groups. But whenever we could help, we were involved. See, the American Indian movement came out of watching some of the things that black people were doing in the 60s, early 70s, fighting for their rights. Dr. King, as quiet as they try to keep it, always supported the plight of the American Indian. When they killed that man, and they did kill him, it was on. And it's been on ever since then. I heard some elder women on Pine Ridge, they would say, all we got to do is pay attention to what the blacks do and follow their lead, and we'll get heard too. But every time Indian people tried to step up, these apples would appear. And I'm not talking about an apple out of a tree. I'm talking about somebody that's red on the outside and white on the inside. Just like black folks call them Oreos. We call them apples. These so-called educated government Indians that were bought and paid for. They always have been the obstruction to the truth about the pain, the suffering, the poverty, the deprivation, the lack of economic opportunities, the lack of self-determination. They always got something to say. while they come to Washington and live in their townhouses like white people.
The last thing I wanted to,
One more
sorry.
thing.
Go ahead, sir.
The worst enemy that an Indian can have is another Indian. Think about that. The same with black people. The worst enemy that black people have had has been another black person. The bourgeoisie Oreo cookies.
On your radio show, you it was interesting last week about the Cherokee and the Freedmen.
The Cherokee Freedmen. When Andrew Jackson decided that he wanted that land in the southeastern part of the United States for white people, there had already been peaceful treaties and peaceful coexistence between Indians and whites. But when he saw that there was a way to make money, a profit, he decided that he was going to round up all of the 6 they call civilized tribes, like no other tribes were civilized, and moved them out west on what became known as the Trail of Tears. He rounded them up and put them in the stockades. And thousands of these people died even before he decided in the coldest winter to make them walk from the south to Oklahoma, from Georgia, Mississippi, and Alabama to Oklahoma. The United States government told him, don't bother those people. And his answer to them was, I got the army, try and stop me. So he carried out this march. Before there was a trail of tears, and before there was a Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, there was a Cherokee Nation here on the East Coast. From the Atlantic Ocean to the Pacific Ocean to the northern border of Florida and the southern border of New York, all of that was Cherokee land. And in the travels of the African people here as free people before slavery, our blood mixed. And a lot of these people that were African people became part of tribes, became part of the original Cherokee Nation. And when the Trail of Tears got underway, some of these same people that were of mixed blood heritage, who had been married to Cherokees and Cherokees married them, were also put on that trail. But because of that mixture of blood, they were a little more resilient than the Cherokees, the Choctaws, the Chickasaws, and all of those other people from those 6 tribes. We would carry the bags of these people. At night, they would hunt for food. They would cook food for the survival of the tribes of people on the trail. They tell these lies about, well, no, they were slaves. Well, if they were slaves, it wasn't the same kind of a slave that the white man had. We actually served as protection for a lot of black people. And when the white man come to us and say, you know, I think that's my slave over there, no, I don't think so. He's part of us. We would protect him. And they use this thing about, oh, Cherokees had slaves. Black folks had slaves too. Y'all don't talk about that. Those free black people that were here in America before the institution of slavery. You don't talk about that. So, over the years, that relationship, that family stayed intact until lately, in the 1900s. You get these Indians that are native, and white. They bear the same mindset of the same white man that we've been talking about, of wanting to control everything and everybody. And then, of course, after the American Indian movement and the onset of casinos, let me tell you, Detroit, the story behind that. The Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma have a very well-ran, lucrative casino. And members of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, members of the tribe, get a monthly allotment check. And then when they elected this fool, Chad Smith, who is white and Cherokee, as chief and also a lawyer and a businessman, only because of his personal dislike of dark people, he started using lies like, well, if we kick these freedmen out of the tribe, then y'all's checks will be a little more each month. And that's the issue. It wasn't about a person's color, it was about money. And if you follow the money trail, if you follow any history of any people, that when it comes to money, the greed begins to set in. So they voted the freedmen out of the tribe. People that have been in the tribe for centuries, they got bloodlines in the tribe for centuries. But it backfired on them. Because when I went to Oklahoma 15 years ago, I went there for the Red Earth powwow. And I took some of my staff with me. Some of the women were with me. Because we were invited to come there. We were met by the organizers of the powwow immediately. They gave all of the women with me these dance shawls. Just like in Islam, women must cover their heads. Women don't go into a dance arena without a shawl. And then they escorted us into the Circle of Honor. And they spoke of me, the only voice in Washington, D.C. that speaks for Native America and tells the truth. And I got that honor, and I really, I'm honored that they would do that for me. Later on that day, I met Marilyn Vann, the president of the Cherokee Freedmen's Association. We sit down, and she told me about the plight, the fight, the racism that was involved with members of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma, and how they were just fighting to get back and get their tribal membership back, thus the benefits. And it's been a fight for 15 years now. But just recently, in August, there was a decision handed down by the circuit court here in Washington, D.C. And Judge Hogan told him, you have to reinstate these people into the tribe with all the rights and benefits. 15 years of being kicked out of a tribe that you belong to for hundreds of years by some white Indian that decides that you're not good enough. Only because of the color of your skin, and only because of economics, more money. Shame on you, Chad Smith. When I had you on my show about 10 years ago to talk about this whole Cherokee Freedmen issue, I know you remember, I hope you see this. It was Chief Tex Hall and I can't think of his name. But anyway, these two men asked you a question. The doctor said to you, Chad, If you shake your family tree, you'll be surprised at who jumps out. That was Dr. Jack D. Forbes, Professor Emeritus, the University of California, Davis, the same man. He was a Native American from the East Coast that wrote the proposal to start the very first Native American university, DQ University. And you blew him off. Chief Tex Hall, at the time, who was the president of the 3 affiliated tribes of North Dakota, the Mandan, Hadasta, and Arikara, and also the past president of the National Congress of American Indians, asked you a question, you couldn't answer it. He said, how do you get rid of your people when these people have been a part of your tribal governments and systems, your tribe, for hundreds of years? How do you get rid of your people? And you hung up the phone. You knew then, you knew before then that what you was doing was wrong. But guess what? God's got an answer for everything. The Cherokee freedmen are now members of the tribe with full membership. And you are no longer the chief. And I made you a promise back then that when you ran for chief again, I would see to it that you don't get elected again, because I contacted a lot of your members that are not living in Oklahoma, and they voted you out. It's not me, Jay Winter Nightwolf. I'm only doing what God told me to do. And I know some other things about you too. You don't want me to put them out there in the public. So you're a lawyer? Go on back being a white lawyer, because that's where you belong. You certainly don't belong with us. That's the end of my story, and I'm sticking to it. I'm honored that you would even think about asking me to do this. And I appreciate who you are for allowing the truth to be told.
Yes, sir.
On the camera.
God bless.
You too, brother. Peace.